In Italian, the object pronoun for voi is vi, but for noi, it's ci. How annoying is that? I mean, look at the other Romance languages as well. This should so obviously be ni, but it's not. It instead looks the same as the, how do you describe it? The kind of location, adverb, thither, there, to it, that kind of thing, the equivalent to the French I in il y a. I hate it. But like, that's not a serious opinion. Even if I could get every Italian speaker to change their mind on this all at once, I wouldn't actually want to change ci to ni. That's just the way the language is. It's just a little hang-up, something my mind snagged on when I was learning Italian. Maybe I'm just an OCD kind of person, like the kind of person who has an OCD diagnosis, I guess. But little details in languages can sometimes kind of bother me. Not me as a linguist, just me as a person. In general, incomplete patterns are not nice. Like the pronouns in German Sign Language, they're all very consistent. You have I like this, my like that, you, your, he, she, it, his, her, its, you plural, your plural, they, their, but then you have we, our. Yep, that's right, not our like that. No. In some dialects, or for some speakers, according to my former teacher, we/our is this instead, but either way, the elegance of the pattern is ruined. But that's just how it is. It's how our brains work. We generalize patterns and memorize exceptions, and it may sometimes be unclear why the pattern is irregular, but the regular version just looks or sounds wrong. Like willn't, as it should be, considering can't and isn't, or any irregular verb, like drank instead of drinked, or brought instead of bringed. But irregular verbs never bothered me. I like irregular verbs, especially in languages with big fat verb conjugation tables like French or Italian. I don't mind irregularity in and of itself, it's just that some patterns feel too graceful to leave incomplete. In Italian again, the direct object pronouns for the third person are lo, la, li, and le, but the obviously related definite articles only match for the feminine, not the masculine, even though if you read older texts like Dante, you see that they all used to match. The masculine singular is instead only sometimes lo, but usually il, and the masculine plural is I or sometimes li. But enough of that, we could sit here naming this kind of slightly off pattern for the next 20 years. It's time to get over the fact that languages are not perfectly symmetrically structured, and just learn them how they are. And what better way to do that than with this video's sponsor, Babbel. Now, I've lived for the past 3 years in Germany. My partner is German. I speak German every day with her and her family and with friends and at uni and so on. So it's only natural that my mother wanted to learn some German. I like to think I've helped her along a bit with that, and one of my first tips was for her to use Babbel, one of the top language learning apps in the world. With courses designed by real language teachers, Babbel gives you a good foundation in whatever language you're learning, whilst providing you with hundreds of examples to practice with and keep you motivated to learn every day. Now, my mum can say all sorts of helpful German phrases like
Wo sind die Toiletten?
And
Könnte ich bitte die Rechnung bekommen?
With ease. To start learning a new language in just 3 weeks, click the link in the description and use my code KLEIN to get 20% off a lifetime subscription. That's 20% off of a lifetime subscription when you use my code to join the millions of Babbel users just like my mother, breaking new language barriers every day. Thank you to Babbel for sponsoring this video. I can ignore the asymmetry of the pattern. What is annoying about the Italian articles, though, is that the masculine singular contracts to l before a vowel. Let me explain. When the feminine singular article la goes before a word with a vowel at the front, it contracts to L', like in l'ora. This is the same process as in French, l'homme and l'heure, where the articles le and la contract, in all cases to avoid the clash of two vowels next to each other. Italian is generally a lot less consistent with this, like la ora is unthinkable apparently, but le ore is completely fine. But perhaps more irritatingly, il uomo is also wrong, being shortened to l'uomo even though there were no vowels clashing with each other in the first place. In this case, however, there is something we can say here. I mentioned earlier that there are circumstances where the masculine singular article is lo. Under certain phonological conditions, like the following word starting with a Z or a consonant cluster beginning with an S, this article appears instead of il, as in lo zio or lo studio. The interesting thing is that in the exact same phonological environments, the masculine plural article becomes li, as in li zii. So we can say that the plural of il is I, and the plural of lo is li. And the plural of l'uomo is gli uomini, suggesting that this L' is the same as lo, not il. Of course, this doesn't explain why we're suddenly allowing two vowels next to each other in the plural, but at least the system makes some sort of sense. However, with the indefinite articles, the feminine una is contracted to un apostrophe before a vowel, as in unora, whilst the masculine article is left as un in un uomo, even though according to this theory it should underlyingly be uno uomo recontracted to un because of the vowel. But I'm pretty sure this is just a spelling thing. Still, French is more consistent here, and the definite articles line up perfectly with the direct object pronouns, and the object pronoun for nous is nous, not like cool, so well done, French. But if you think I'm letting the French object pronouns off easy, think again, because there's an odd detail in the order of these pronouns. Generally, these pronouns appear before the verb, as in je l'aime or elle me voit, meaning I love him or I love her and she sees me. But what about when you have two objects, a direct and an indirect object, as in he gives it to me, with it referring to le citron, the lemon, so a masculine noun. Then you get il me le donne, he, me, it gives. Simple enough, right? Well, with he gives it to her or he gives it to him, we instead get il le lui donne. See that? The word order switch. This lui is the to him or to her component, the indirect object pronoun corresponding to the me in the first sentence. So why does one sentence have the indirect object before the direct object, and the other have them the other way around? What's happening here is that the proclitic pronouns before French verbs follow this order, with the pronouns of the first and second person plus the third person reflexive going first, then the third person pronouns for direct objects, then the indirect objects, and then these two, but they're not important right now. This is a really interesting order because all the pronouns in the first slot share the property of being the same whether they are used as direct objects or indirect objects, as we saw with elle me voit and il me le donne, whilst the more use case specific pronouns of the third person come afterwards. We can say that the third person pronouns here are specified for case, that is, they take different forms depending on their function and their place in the structure of the sentence. Le, la, and the plural les are accusative pronouns, whilst lui and its plural leur are dative pronouns. If we want to be really fancy, we can call I a locative and en a partitive, but putting that aside, we can say that the pronouns in this first set don't really have case, or maybe they're just generically labelled as objects. This is really cool because in this analysis, the me in elle me voit and the me in il me le donne are genuinely exactly the same element. Yes, French has a dative accusative distinction, but only in the third person. The word order tells us that this distinction isn't just invisible in the first person, no, it genuinely doesn't exist. It's this wonderful what you see is what you get analysis, and if we ignore ce, we even get the hierarchy of first, second person, third person animate, third person inanimate with increasing case specificity, and it just looks so beautiful. So, what's the problem? Well, French has this really niche piece of grammar where in the perfect, if the direct object occurs before the verb, for instance, if it's a proclitic pronoun between the subject and the auxiliary, the past participle agrees with it in gender and number. Now, this isn't that weird if you, for instance, speak Italian, where the same thing happens. I have seen him is l'ho visto, I have seen her, l'ho vista, I have seen them, li ho visti, le ho viste, depending on whether or not the group is all women. In the first two examples, because lo and la contract a l before o, the gender information is entirely communicated by the participle. In French, the first two of these phrases are je l'ai vu and je l'ai vu, and the last two are je les ai vus and je les ai vus. Except the past participles are spelled like this. Yes, this is French, remember, so unlike in Italian, half of every word is silent. These plural endings are, I'm pretty sure, never pronounced. French speakers, please do comment down below if you think of some rare liaison counterexample, but I think there's actually no evidence in the spoken language that these plural endings, exist. However, the feminine endings, although the vast majority of past participles end in vowels, meaning they are almost always silent, there is a small set where they are pronounced. The ones that are spelt with a final consonant, which is usually silent, but then becomes heard when a feminine ending is in place, such as with je l'ai craint versus je l'ai crainte, I feared him versus I feared her. This also happens with the first person if the speaker is feminine, like a man would say, le monstre m'a pris, the monster took me, whilst a woman would say, le monstre m'a prise. Wait, hang on. But didn't I just say that this only happens with direct objects? With a phrase like je le lui ai offert, it doesn't matter whether we're saying I offered it to him or I offered it to her. That offert will not get a feminine ending unless the direct object, the thing being offered, that is, the object that is marked for accusative, is feminine. Like, say, une pomme. Same thing for me. Both women and men would say il me l'a offert, for he offered it to me, as long as the it in question is masculine, and il me l'a offerte if the it is feminine. Thus, an accusative me and a dative me must be distinguishable for the past participle to know, if you will, whether or not to agree with it. Which is horrible. I'm sure this isn't impossible to analyze. We could keep analyzing until we make ourselves dizzy, but the nice, neat analysis of that first-person pronoun simply not being specified for accusative or dative is gone. And besides, if we want to make ourselves dizzy, we can just look at how to count. In modern Standard Arabic, I think most people's experiences of learning MSA are bizarre and a bit intimidating, and my 6 months of learning the basics were no different. Perhaps the pinnacle of the suffering of my class during this time was when we were introduced to the counting system. MSA has a singular dual plural distinction, so instead of just distinguishing grammatically between one and more than one, you distinguish one, two, and more than two. This means that for 1 or 2, no number is really needed semantically, as the grammar distinguishes the number for you, but you can add the words واحد and اثنين for emphasis, agreeing in case and gender with the noun. So far so good. But then from 3, you put the numeral before the noun in a special form called the construct state, and the plural noun goes in the genitive, and the numeral exhibits gender polarity, where it has the opposite gender of whatever noun you're counting. Okay, that's a very weird system. But then, from 11 we get gender congruence, and the whole phrase becomes accusative, and the noun goes back to the singular form. But then, from 13 to 19, the 10 part of the word agrees in gender, but the other numeral disagrees. 20 is masculine and doesn't care what gender the noun it's counting has. Then for 21 and 22, the 1 or 2 bits agree with the gender of the noun, 3 to 9 polarize with it, and whilst the counted noun itself is still an accusative, the numerals now take their case from their position in the sentence. This pattern repeats up to 99, and then 100 is inherently feminine and assigns genitive to the noun again. 200 is the dual form of 100, and above that the multiply numeral shows polarity with the 100, so it's always masculine. And then do all that again, but in reverse for 1000, which is inherently masculine and thus takes feminine multipliers. Did you get all that? Where do we start? Okay, I get that with all these compound numbers, their 2 parts essentially agree separately from one another with the noun. The consistent thing here is that the numerals 1 to 2 work one way, 3 to 9 another way, 20, 30, 40, etc. a third way, and 100 and 1000 a fourth way. And when you combine them, all their individual rules don't really get combined, they just trigger simultaneously and separately. 10 is the odd one out, as it works like 3 to 9 when it's on its own, but in a unique 5th way when in compound from 11 to 19. 1 and 2 are easy to analyze. When they're on their own, they follow the noun as adjectives do in Arabic, and they agree with the noun in gender and case, as adjectives do in Arabic. They're adjectives. But as for the rest of the numerals, I mean, they're nouns, right? They're nouns, but not quite. For 3 to 10, they take the case assigned to them by the rest of the sentence, very noun-like, and they form structures that look like regular genitive constructions in Arabic, with a word in the construct state, that's the non-genitive bit, the possessed bit, if you will, of the genitive structure, followed by a noun in the genitive. The structure is equivalent to 3 of the books in the definite. However, not only do these nouns show gender polarity for some reason, according to this dissertation I found, they can also be used post-nominally, looking almost like adjectives, except they still display the same polarity. So this must have something to do with these words inherently. The 20, 30, 100, and 1000 numbers have inherent gender, so they've got that going for them in the noun column, and the weird numerals 3 to 9 display gender polarity with and assign the genitive to 100 or 1000, essentially treating them the way they treat regular nouns. 100 to 1000 even have dual forms, and the 20 to 90 numerals look like regular masculine plurals for what it's worth. And 100 and 1000 assign genitive again. However, usually you can't make construct state nouns definite. The definite article appears instead on the genitive noun, which is what happens for the numbers 3 to 10. But for the bigger numerals, they'll just happily bang on the definite article al without a second thought. And the accusative. I can get over gender polarity. I can even get over the fact that these nouns go back to the singular. We can say that these higher numerals just kind of treat them as mass nouns. But accusative? If you're a noun, what are you doing assigning accusative to another noun instead of genitive? And 11 to 19? What are you doing? Who told you to be completely in the accusative? You can't just do that on your own in a subject position. You need permission from a verb. I don't get it. I don't get it. I actually don't get it. Okay, but enough about language learning. How about we take a quick look at something I can't explain in my own native language. Swedish has two genders, like French and Italian and Arabic, though instead of masculine and feminine, these are neuter and common. So basically all the gendered words like man, kvinna, pojke, flicka all have the same gender, the common taking the indefinite article en, whilst some random words have the neuter with the indefinite article et instead. When we then have an adjective like stor, meaning big, this base form is used for common gender words like en stor man, and a form with an added t is used for the neuter like ett stort barn, and an added a is used for the plural like stora män or stora barn. There's a few more patterns, though these ones can actually all be explained by purely phonological rules, so they're not really exceptions. The one we care about here, though, is that final double D becomes double T in the neuter, like en högljutt man, but ett högljutt barn. En rädd man, ett rätt barn. Ett rätt barn, en rädd. And just like that, 50% of the native Swedish speakers watching this video are probably second screening a Google search for the neuter form of rädd, the Swedish word for scared, because, we just don't like using this adjective in the neuter, I guess. There's nothing wrong with en rädd man, or rädda män, or rädda barn, or the definite form det rädda barnet, let's not get too much into that, but how do you say a scared child in Swedish? I mean, there are some differing opinions. I have heard some people, at least claim, to accept ett rätt barn, and I'm sure they do say that in many dialects. Rätt is technically the neuter form of this word. I've never heard anyone be happy with ett rädd barn, and I personally think it sounds completely insane, but then barnet är rädd? The child is scared, with the common gender form of the adjective, is, I think, relatively common colloquially, but then again I think a lot of people use common gender forms of predicative adjectives with this noun specifically because it refers to an animate little person. Like if you do a quick Google search, you will also find examples of barnet är glad or barnet är ledsen. Something like fåret är rädd sounds a bit weirder. Though, maybe it's just me, but for some reason if rädd has a complement, like fåret är rädd för vargen, some of that weirdness disappears. Still, using this adjective attributively in the neuter is just not a possibility for many, if not most, speakers of Swedish. Because rädd clashes so clearly with the neuter word next to it, but rätt is just a strange form. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that rätt is a word meaning correct, or correctness, or also like a dish. But honestly, I don't see why we would be so scared of these sounding the same. This is a language where kvinnan är gift can mean both the woman is married and the woman is poison. So I think we can deal with a couple of homophones. Whatever, ignore everything I just said, just use a synonym. My head is spinning and I legitimately can't tell what is grammatically correct anymore. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed that and it wasn't too confusing. And if it was, I hope my enthusiastic declarations of despair made up for it. I wanted to show a bit of what goes on in my brain every day, I guess. These kinds of problems and seeing which ones can be worked into an analysis is something I'm always thinking about. I obviously write a lot for university. I'm writing my bachelor's thesis right now, and my YouTube videos, I usually try to have some neat little analysis, or occasionally even a very good and cool analysis, if I may say so myself. But I thought it would be nice to look at some of the times where that analysis has failed, or didn't end up being that satisfying, or where I just don't even know how to start. I had a lot of fun making this video, actually. It was kind of weirdly therapeutic. Italian speakers, please let me know whether or not the pronunciation of the masculine un before a vowel and the feminine un apostrophe before a vowel are any different. And if not, please consider spelling the masculine with an apostrophe as well. I understand that that makes it harder to see if it's masculine or feminine, but that didn't stop you with L apostrophes, so surely you shouldn't mind too much here. And, you know, it could catch on. Like, you could start saying ni instead of chi. Like, you could be the change I want to see.